bring in David Wu of David Wu Unbound. He formerly oversaw emerging markets fixed income strategy at Bank of America. David, great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
What's your take about the latest talk about tariffs? And, you know, we have the benefit of having learned what the impact of tariffs could be from the first Trump administration. So what are your conclusions?
I think the most important takeaway from the announcement last night is the fact that China was only hit with a 10% tariff versus 25% for both Canada and Mexico, which is actually very surprising if you think about this. But then again, if you think about it, it's not that surprising because guess what? The biggest basically tariff, whatever you call it, warmonger, Lighthizer, has not yet landed a job in the White House. He should have been the first appointment, and yet he has nowhere to be seen. In my view, what this tells me is something obvious, which is very likely Trump has already begun the engagement with the Chinese. I bet you informal talks are already progressing. Let's think about this. The second most important person in this Trump administration is going to be Elon Musk. Elon Musk has this biggest factory in the world in China. He's building the second biggest factory in the world in China. China is the second largest market for Tesla. So from that point of view, I don't think Elon Musk wants to see a blow up between the U.S. and China. On top of that, given the massive escalation in the Ukraine war, given what Biden is doing to provoke Putin to declare World War III, Trump probably has to now reach out to Xi Jinping, probably who's the only person who's got some leverage over Putin to basically help Trump to bring him across the line. So I would argue everything being said, I think actually what the announcement yesterday has nothing to do with tariff, has nothing to do with anything. In fact, probably just means that the administration is making a lot more faster progress than you might imagine when it comes to doing a deal with China.
So you think there's actually a floor to how bad the relationship with China could get then, which would be sort of counter consensus at this point because, you know, people on Wall Street are thinking the worst. I mean, if you're talking the big number, 60% tariffs, and I know 10% is the opening salvo, but if you're thinking ultimately it's 60, then that could be terrible, right? So if you're saying that there's a floor because Elon Musk is going to...
Exactly. Let's remind your viewers some numbers. In 2018, when Trump declared trade war on China, China accounted for 23% of total U.S. imports. Today, China only accounts for 13% of U.S. imports. In other words, even with 60% tariff, you're not going to hurt China that much. You're not going to raise too much revenue, and you're probably not even going to balance the U.S. trade deficit. And I guarantee you what Scott Bessent, who is telling Trump, is that, you know what, you can hit China with 60% tariff, but long-term interest rate is going to go up so much, it's going to make it counterproductive. You're going to raise less money by hitting China with tariff than you're going to lose by paying out more interest payment, which is now at $1.1 trillion. So I think from that point of view, to me, what Trump is after is not the tariff. Trump needs the Chinese to create jobs in the U.S. I think there's a much more obvious deal that they're talking about on the table, which is lifting restriction on foreign investment for the Chinese in the U.S. to allow the likes of BYD to basically come into the U.S., create jobs, build factories, and make cars and sell to the Americans, which is what the Americans did for the Japanese 40 years ago, the Koreans 20 years ago, and the Germans 10 years ago. You think Trump really can, I mean, he gives a damn about whether it's the Japanese or the Chinese car, whatever. For Trump, it's only us versus them. And them is the same. So I think as long as the Chinese are willing to build cars in the U.S., I think that will be the win-win.
Going back, though, to Elon Musk being the second most important person in the administration, allowing BYD into the country and NIO and all the other Chinese EV makers, for that matter, that could really hurt Tesla. So how does that happen in your scenario of Musk being very important?
Let's just think about this. Musk recently said he doesn't want to build a cheap, basically, EV car anymore. The Model 3 has sort of abandoned the idea because I think he's bracing for this idea, what I'm proposing. In fact, from that point of view, Elon Musk can basically stay competitive at the high end, focus on autonomous driving, which is something the Chinese are not going to be able to actually enter because the whole ban on connectivity. So from that point of view, you know what? You know, BYD is going to probably hurt Toyota, Honda, the Hyundai, and so on and so forth. American car manufacturers, anyway, not really that big in EV. They basically sell trucks for a living. So from that point of view, let the Chinese take market share from the Japanese, the Koreans, and everybody else. To me, it's not obvious that Elon Musk is going to be a big loser here. He could actually end up being a big winner. Remember, Elon Musk has already said on a number of occasions, his factory in China is the most productive automobile factory in the world. And he says that they produce the best, highest quality Teslas. That is much more important to Elon Musk in terms of his basically aim to become a global player.